Okay, we'll get started. I know, Grace, you have lots to say, so I will not talk too long before I give you an opportunity to do so. I just thought I would start by saying the book for me I'm going to respond in a very personal way because I have a very strong personal response to the last section of this novel. Yeah. So I'd like to also try to distance myself emotionally a little bit and try to judge objectively what Flaubert is trying to achieve. And maybe the outcome will be the same of both of those. I'm not sure, but because I don't feel total clarity about why he writes this last section the way he does. But
makes me feel bad.
I was preparing that I had read the novel before. I read it again for these sessions. And last night I was preparing notes for it. And I'm a person who tries to conduct myself with some amount of dignity. So I will moderate my language as we're talking about the book. But there's a lot of foul language in my notes. I just felt so upset by the ending. And I think there's a lot to say about that, way too much to say about it, but just briefly, so I can give you a chance, Grace. The ending, as I told Ray long ago in exchanging text messages about this, feels to me callous, inhumane, utterly unsympathetic to the human plight in a way that I found chilling, actually, chilling and disgusting. And up until that point, I felt a certain amount of sympathy on the part of Flaubert for Emma. And I think we've talked about this before, but a certain amount of identity with her, that it just felt like he's describing a world with which he is very frustrated and disillusioned and disappointed. And he presents this character who longs in vain for something more. And it felt like that's who he is too. But then what I would expect from an author for whom I could disagree but have more respect is for him to treat her death with humanity and sympathy. And I don't feel that at all. And I'm really curious to hear other people's reactions to it. But it felt, the word I used when I was communicating with Ray about this long ago, and I still hold by this reaction, though it's very hard for me to validate, is it felt almost gleeful to me, the tortures he put her through. Like there was some kind of perverse self-satisfaction in watching her or making her, it's his choice to focus on what he did, to make her go through what he did. And something about it felt like the person who's writing the scene this way has to have this very basic kind of inhumane, to delight as much as it seems like he did in juxtaposing the conversations of Homais and the other men with the agonies of her death throes. It was chilling and upsetting and disturbing to me. So whereas prior to that, I could disagree with Flaubert, but feel a certain amount of sympathy with the perspective and enjoy the presentation of characters with whom we all have some familiarity and experience. And, in some ways we can sympathize with a longing for something that can be hard to realize in reality, or, all of those things. But I felt no sympathy. I just felt no connection to the mind who wrote the last of these chapters. Okay, I'll shut up now and tell me your feelings.
I felt basically the exact same way. So yeah, I felt nauseated by the end of the book. I've also felt that he treated her death very callously, that it was just kind of like, It was almost like he was like, up until then we had been able to, see things from her perspective and be like, okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about. This is the worldview that you're describing.
Thanks,
And then he
TV.
gets to
Ago.
what's going on?
I think someone was unmuted, but
Oh,
took care
sorry,
of it.
I was confused.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt someone who was trying to talk. But anyway, what was I saying? So
that he was up until then.
yeah, okay, thank you.
yeah.
Up until
Mhm.
then, I felt like I could see things from that perspective. I felt like that was valuable. And then at that point, it felt like he was like, and this is what happens.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of like, that? No, like the part where she's dead in the bed and people are looking at her and saying like, oh, she's so pretty. It looks like she'll get up at any time. And then they put the wreath around her neck and they move her and black liquid starts pouring out of her mouth. I'm like, are you kidding?
Mhm. Mhm.
It seemed like,
Yeah, I think maybe gratuitous might be the word. Like
gratuitous.
a detail like that feels like it's not. So I understand that he has to have her. I mean, what's the last line of the book? The last line of the book is Homais got the Legion of Honor, right? Okay, so that's the world he's presenting, a world in which Homais gets the Legion of Honor and she dies a miserable death. I understand that, but there were so many details of this prolonged, agonizing death scene that that we're driving it home in a way that makes it feel like I guess makes it less feel like, yes, that's how things are and must be, and it's tragic, and more like you're kind of sneering and laughing at the stupidity of it all. And
That's a
fine,
perfect way to put it.
that's a perspective that is worthwhile, I suppose, to encounter in literature, but I do not like
No.
I do not like the mind and soul and spirit of the person who looks at the world that way.
Agreed. And pretty much you took these amorphous feelings and put them into very clear words. That's exactly it. It's gratuitous, it's nauseating, and I feel exactly the same way you do about the mind of someone who could sneer at something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's how I felt.
All right, Ray, let's hear it.
I think Stefan was first, but
Oh, was he? I missed that hand. Okay.
But I'll just go.
Okay.
I have a different attitude towards the ending. Actually, I just have to say that I'm not. I'd like to know what details you guys find specifically to be gratuitous. Maybe I'm just somebody who's
I got
just
plenty of those.
I mean, you mentioned a few like the black liquid. But maybe I'm just desensitized to violence or something, you know. So I don't know. But for me, I just found the ending to be perfect. It's not an ending I cry to because I don't really connect with Emma because there's that superficiality to her. But it's just fascinating and it fits like the way that you have Homais trying to impress himself in front of the surgeon during that, the way you even see him during the wake, like arguing back and forth with the priest, and then you find out that, oh, it doesn't really matter to me, this whole atheism business or whatever he is, like all that's just a sort of, again, we're good buddies. I find the way that in life, from Flaubert's perspective, you don't get a nice, dramatic, grand death. You don't get that. What you get is the tedium and banality of everyday life infecting even your last moments. And this sort of beautiful idea of, oh, I'll poison myself and I'll be this, like, falling into a dream, and I'll be able to look back on all my past. Like, no, you have brown splotches on your skin, and you're going to be begging for it to just go faster and regretting the whole thing. It's again just another suicide is another illusion, which is much uglier when you deal with the actual fact of it.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second just so we can try to nail down the distinction between your perspective and mine, because I agree with all that. And there's a way it could have been presented that it felt like a continuity from the chapters before, but to me, it felt like something of a departure, or else a better revelation of what's actually going inside of his soul. So the difference for me is that, yes, that is perfect, because that is how this novel had to end. It had to end with her saying, what was the line about how her death was going to be? I know I wrote it down somewhere. It was something about how like death will be so simple, or something to that effect. And then of course it is as far from that as it could possibly be. But
Right.
You could treat her and that scenario with tenderness and sympathy and regret that this is the way it is. And there's something about the presentation of it to me that did not feel tender or sympathetic or regretful that this is how it plays out, but mocking. It felt mocking. And
yeah, I can see what you mean by the mocking. There is that edge of just like the way it's like, the one man is saying like, oh, if you sleep with me, I'll get this off, and then later on she's like, sleep with me please now, like the irony is there. And just, and again, just the way her I don't know, it even feels like a little bit joking at Justin, like in that scene of like, oh, I don't know how she got the arsenious liquid, and then Justin drops the plates, like there's that bit of humor there when it's like that's an incredibly horrible thing for that young boy to go through. So I can see that. I guess I just have a different, let's see. I think that way of pointing out the absurdities and the horrible stupidity of life, he's in a sense, he is noting that it's a joke, but I don't quite think he's laughing at her so much.
No, I don't think it's laughing exactly. I'm going to make a very weird connection, and I apologize if it falls completely flat, but it's so strong in my own mind and association that I have to try it out. So when I was in college, I went to a screening of a movie called Wild at Heart, which was by David Lynch. I don't know if anybody has ever encountered that movie. I hope not. But you'd probably know who David Lynch is. And he's got this kind of dark, twisted, eccentric style. Is that a fair description? And what I recall, now this is how many years ago? 30 years ago now. But what I recall is a scene in which someone comes upon a car accident. And the car accident, it's a devastating, fatal car accident, but the person is not yet dead. She's walking around and she's a little bit like delusional because of what's happened to her, but she's about to die. And I remember there being so many protracted and grotesque elements to that scene that my reaction was a repulsion like few things have ever given me in art. I mean, a total overwhelming repulsion. The only other things for me in that category are Deliverance and Pulp Fiction, which I know the latter is really controversial, but same thing for me. Like, this is the opposite of my feeling about life, something in a way that just feels so grotesque. So yeah, the connection that I'm making here is there was something about that scene where it felt like there was no necessity of these details, and it felt like a perverse enjoyment of delivering these details. It felt like there's something perverse about the things which understandably and nobly we want to turn away from and not make an emphasis in our thoughts. Now I'm gonna dwell on those. And that's what it feels don't know if this is fair, and I know how personal it is as a reaction, but that's how I feel reading this. Like there's a perverse dwelling in those things. It makes it feel like he wants to crush her under like he's delighting in crushing her under his, you stupid woman, for having these vain ideals. So in any case, whether you would agree, do you see the
Oh
distinction?
no, I think
Yeah.
that's a very powerful comparison. I think that like, well, first I watched a couple of Lynch stuff, so I know what you're
I get
talking
the
about.
spirit. Yeah.
Well, and I like Lynch at least part of the time, but no, but the idea of, yeah, like there are certain details about death. I've seen these in movies and books where it's like that's really grotesque and horrible, like that level of like anatomical detail. And I can see why, things like the black bile or the splotches or other things like that strike you in that way. And I can even see like how adding those details in some contexts, like Tarantino is an excellent example of that, because he really is getting off to those sort of details. Like he there's a sexual component to it. I think Reservoir Dogs is ample proof of that. But which I recently rewatched. But there's so I do think there is such a thing as that phenomenon. And I think in a certain way with Flaubert, that sort of thing does exist, sort of, as in with like what was his name, Homais. The way we just spend so much time looking at his stupidity and tediousness, it really is. It's a fetish for him. He's rubbing it in, the tedium, the grossness of this man.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think the thing that made it cross a threshold for me in this scene is that Homais' tediousness gets amplified to an incredible extreme. I mean, if I were teaching this novel, which I never will, but if I were teaching this novel to students, we would be making a top 10 moments that Homais is an unbelievable ass in the last couple of chapters, because there's so much to choose from. But it's the fact of dwelling in that in such detail in juxtaposition to Emma dying an agonizing death. It's like he heightens that just as he makes her go through all those.
I
Yeah.
I do think you're making a really great connections here, but I will, this is my last point and let someone else
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
That I do think though that even though, like, yes, he does delight in the tedium and like rubbing it in, I don't think he's making fun of her on a certain level, or he's pointing out the absurdity of her and the absurdity around her. But I don't quite
No,
think.
I wouldn't use the phrase making fun of her either, though. And in some ways, making fun of her would feel better to me than what it actually seems like. It's something like, I mean, perversely.
Yeah, glee in her
Glee.
destruction.
Yeah, it's still gleeful.
I,
Yeah.
God, it's I I'm gonna have to think about this more, a
All
lot
right.
more.
Well, let's get a couple other people to. Stefan, did you?
Yeah, there's a lot to say. Well, obviously I wasn't here last time. Can you hear me, by the way?
Uh-huh.
I got new AirPods. My old ones, I guess, are just
Okay.
bad. So there's a lot to say. I just want to I just want to go back to when I wasn't here. Just one scene about the carriage ride with Leon I thought was really funny. It's just like one of my favorite scenes, because at first I didn't realize what they were doing.
Yeah.
Anyways. The sexual scenes always just seem to go over my head at first. I don't know what it is.
They had to be very subtle about it.
Yeah. It was just almost better in a way.
Yeah.
So real quick, it's funny you mentioned David Lynch. I went on a date with this girl about a month ago, and she just kind of had a darkness about her. Let's put it that way, like a soul darkness. And David Lynch was like she was telling me, was one of her favorite I never heard of him before. I probably have, but not really. And when I look at him and I looked at the kind of films that he did, I got that vibe that I got from this last scene. So on
That's
what we're
interesting.
actually talking about. So it's interesting to me because it's like you said, he builds up this character, he tells his whole story about this woman. And then at the end, he does, it seems like it's a commentary on a woman who's promiscuous in a sense, or he kind of likes I don't know if it's like an experience he's had in his life where he had a woman that, you know, maybe cheated on him or something like that. And just kind of revel, because I didn't think about it until you said that he was, you know, really enjoying the details of her dying and death. And I wonder why, you know, like, did he have an experience like this kind of woman who's out and about, who's taking her husband's money and wasting it and just ruining his life? And, you know,
I wouldn't look for a direct life connection, because even if there is, it's just something that led to a general worldview. And I think he's presenting what is truly his worldview. And the sense I get from it is not that he created a specific character who's done specific things and then delighted in destroying her, but it just this vision of a world where ideals are childish, romanticized notions that you can only find in books, and there's not going to be any realization of them in reality. And so you show a character who's kind of obsessively, compulsively seeking those things in reality, and it's just vain and ridiculous, and you see what it actually amounts to. And then ultimately what it amounts to is her at least thinking she can have a romantic death and not getting that either.
So, okay, I see what you're saying. So basically he's saying that this is what it really is. It's going to be an ugly end. It's not going to be pretty. And that's life in a sense. I gotcha. I agree with that.
Shoshana. Oh, can't hear you.
Okay, it's certainly the case that Flaubert, who's got great descriptive gifts, describes some things in the sequence that we don't want to read. But I think you also have to see that the whole picture includes those details and also Emma's perspective. And I'm just going to read here from the translation I have. Emma was thinking that now she was through with all the betrayals, the infamies, the countless fierce desires that had racked her. She's relieved, okay? She hated no one now. A twilight confusion was falling over her thoughts, and of all the world's sounds, she heard only the intermittent lament of this poor man beside her, gentle and indistinct, like the last echo of an ever fainter symphony. This is pleasant. You know, this is a good day for Emma. And then, you know, later when we got the priest, she slowly turned her face and seemed overjoyed at suddenly seeing the purple stole, doubtless recognizing in this interval of extraordinary peace the lost ecstasy of her first mystical flights and the first visions of eternal bliss. So that's Emma. She kind of seesaws between these pleasant, happy things, the death that she wanted and peace and ending this. And then, of course, there are the gritty, unpleasant, undeniable aspects of her death. So I think that that's part of why those things have to be there, because that's not all of Emma's always seeing what she wants, and sometimes she's partially getting it. She has the illusion of happiness, and then there's, you know, somebody turns the lights on, she's got the rest of reality. So I think that's why it has to be so strong, because otherwise you look at it and Emma's having a good day. Emma's actually getting what she wants. No, Emma's, you know, Flaubert has to give you the whole picture, because if she's commuting between reality and illusion, you know, she's got to have the whole thing. So that, I think that's part of why that's there. It has to be very strong, and it's portrayed, the gritty details from the outside more than from the inside. You know, she says, oh, this is horrible, but it's not, he's not actually giving you the consciousness in the same way that he's giving you the consciousness of her feeling at peace and
Mhm.
grace and happy and so on. So I think that's why those things are there. And I think it's part of Flaubert's way of conveying Emma's experience. The second
Mhm.
thing I wanted to say, which again, thinking in terms of, there's sort of two things that maybe they're external, but I don't like to teach The Awakening by Kate Chopin,
Mhm.
because I think that there's, to some extent, it romanticizes death.
Mhm.
And I especially don't want to put that book in the hands of young people. And, you know, and I'm unhappy. I was unhappy yesterday. I'm unhappy today. I'm unhappy tomorrow. Oh, you know, and then, you
Mhm.
know, terrible. You know, it's
Mhm.
very wrong. Now, I understand that suicide ought to be legal, that for people in certain medical circumstances and so on, but Emma's not in those circumstances.
Mhm.
So this is not right for this. Emma had other choices. You know, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I certainly, again, wouldn't want to put this book in the hands of young people and give them only the happy Emma paragraphs without the rest of it. And you
Mhm.
know, and when you were mentioning a movie that you saw years ago, I remembered one too. And
Mhm.
this is probably not one that you have seen lately, but it was the first of the Dirty Harry movies.
Mhm.
Okay. And in the first of the Dirty Harry movies, one of Dirty Harry's jobs as a police officer is to climb up to where someone is going to jump. Okay. And his job is to get that person off the roof without his committing suicide. And what he does, anybody remember what he does? Instead of trying to be sort of touchy-feely with the guy and meaning of life and so on, he says, well, you know, maybe we should get your information and your address and so on, because once you jump, it's going to be yucky and gooey and we're not going to know anything about you. You know, and basically and meanwhile, the guy's not jumping. He's thinking about that. And then Harry grabs him,
Mhm.
saves him.
Mhm.
And I just sort of thought that was interesting. It's almost as if Flaubert is being Dirty Harry here. And
Mhm.
that he's saying, oh, you know, you think you swallow this poison and it's going to be like an opera death. That's what
Right.
Emma thinks. It's going to be
Right.
like the opera death where, you know, the soprano was dying, but she can sing for 10 minutes while she's dying. And no, you know, death is not pretty like that. And especially the death that she's chosen. And so I think that's why it has to be there. I mean, I don't think that it's that he loves ugliness, but that's part of Emma's story. And if he only had Emma's romantic, peaceful,
Sure.
everything
But
fading away perspective, that would be untrue.
of course, and I guess that's helpful because I can differentiate my feeling about it from what you've described too, because I certainly don't want it to be peaceful for her. And I don't think that would be consistent with the rest of the book. If her death were the opera death that she's expecting, then that would negate and contradict everything that had come before. So it does have to be, this is so hard for me to nail down specifically what it is that appalls me about it, or that I just felt a strong sense of revulsion to, that I didn't feel with the rest of the book. But part of it is, so Leon and Rodolphe being asleep while she died, that's detail enough for me. But it's not quite going to the point of, I mean, the things, you know, Ray was asking before, what are the details that really felt so appalling to me? And it was things like Homais, you know, falling asleep and snoring while she, you know, it was the black liquid oozing from her mouth. It was, I mean, the lengthy attention given to Homais, and like, I mean, there were just so many moments, like he didn't have time to prepare a speech for her grave. He's how like completely self-absorbed he is, and that he brings a writing pad to sit next to her corpse. Now, I know this is all about Homais, but it's just so protracted, this whole, it's not just, you don't get the romanticized death that you thought you were going to get. It's spending so much time creating in agonizing detail this juxtaposition between her death and the continued like blind, tedious, cold inability to have any spiritual meaning to what is happening. Like so much attention to that as the world around her, and so much attention to her own agonies. So it's not that I wanted it to be romantic, it's just that something about it felt inhumane and unsympathetic, that the extent or the nature of the details felt not like this was, no, this is the world and this is what happens and that's terrible, but like, I'm going to revel in my clever presentation of how stupid the world is. Like it felt self-satisfied. I got this vibe of self-satisfaction on the part of the author, instead of I'm having to write this and it hurts to have to write it. But that's
really
a hard thing to
grateful that you
justify.
But see,
Yeah.
here's the
I'm-
thing. If Emma were still there, he
Mhm.
wouldn't be writing all of this. It's almost as if that's what happens. So, all right, Emma, you know, you're taking yourself out of the story. Look what happens to the story without you. We've got people who are stupider than you are. I mean, basically, Omei inherits the earth, and
Yeah.
he's an unworthy heir. So I think that's all part of what happens with Emma being. If Emma were still around, she'd be getting up to who knows what kinds of trouble. But at least we wouldn't be spending our time with this idiot. And while we're on the subject, by the way, Charles dies too young.
Mhm.
Just saying, and of course, we're not particularly sympathetic with him. He's not wise, but it's also true that her death harms him.
I think that's like that last scene too. So he just dies slumped over, and then his daughter is sent off to work.
Yeah.
In what was it? She lives in poverty and yeah, okay. Well, it's interesting. I don't know who, do we have an order?
Stephanie's next.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say,
Stephanie,
think-
not Stefan.
oh, sorry, excuse me. All right, the feminine version.
Yeah.
Hi. All right, I put something in the chat before some of the comments, because the way you're describing it, Lisa, where he's gleeful about it, it sounds like there is something personal, that it's not just that you were a silly woman, but that you didn't love me, you wanted everything but me, and that there's something, whether it's personal or it's just he had a friend who had this happen to him, or some story that he heard, and he just thought, this ungrateful cow just takes and takes and takes, and you're gonna get what you deserve, bitch. And it has that sense to it, right? Rather than I mean, it's definitely some malevolent universe premise, because that's his view, right? That you can't gain your values. Your values are stupid to begin with, but to not have her smarten up or figure out she's going down the wrong road, to have her choose suicide, and then to take such a grotesque depiction of it, and to give you the sense that is that he's reveling in it, is coming from something. That's my take on it, that he's giving vent to these very unpopular ideas, right? That you're going to get what you deserve, and this is the end.
Well, so I understand what you're saying, but for whatever it's worth, let me just offer my perspective on looking for biographical causes. To me, if we look, understanding the biography of the author, I think, can be very helpful for understanding their worldview or understanding what they're presenting in their novels. But the danger in in looking for biographical causes is that it can become like psychologizing, because then we're separating ourselves from the details of the story that are available to us and trying to project what's inside of the person. So I just generally try to stay away from doing that, because while there may be something, there very well may be a cause like that, it's not accessible to us. What is accessible to us is what's on the pages.
Okay, but why would he choose to present this character and all of her foibles and all of her journeys and everything that her entire story?
Well,
why he would
I think the
choose
why.
to present that to me is like, well, what is he drawing on?
No, but what we need to assume he's drawing on is his view of the world, and that part I don't find that perplexing. Why would he have her die a miserable death? That seems consistent, utterly consistent with everything that came before. When we're children, we have these illusions about the achievement of spiritual values. We have this longing for kind of grandeur and excitement and beauty. And then we discover that life in reality is very tedious and pointless and prosaic and meaningless. And the longing for spiritual values is something that's unfulfilled and cannot be fulfilled. And to the extent that you try to fulfill it by chasing excitement or wealth or luxury or all the things that give you an illusion of bear a resemblance to matters of the heart or bear a resemblance to spiritual values, to the extent that we pursue those, it's all in vain. It's not actually going to satisfy that longing for romantic satisfaction. And what's really going to happen is that you're going to end up broke with all your stuff being repossessed. You're an adulteress like that. And then you're going to, in a last ditch effort to live the romantic spiritual life, you're going to have a glorious suicide. No, that's not how it works either.
I understand your point about the glorious suicide and not wanting to psychologize him. But I think everybody has had the experience of unrequited love and how one deals with it and how one says, okay, pick up pieces, move on, right? And figure out things.
There's nothing about unrequited. I mean, you could sort of say Charles's love is unrequited, but he doesn't even love that strongly. So I just don't see that. That's really going outside of the story and trying to give him motivation. So I just like to keep more to.
I'm trying to figure out, well, why would he take delight in presenting her death this way, of the gory details? What could be motivating that?
I don't know.
And that was what I was trying to figure out, because
yeah. All right,
it just seems sordid.
Yeah.
Wendy's.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I have questions and some thoughts. I'm really curious about something. So we get to the end of chapter 8, and honestly, by the end, I started to get of her death throes. I started to get worried that somehow she wasn't going to die, because we weren't at the end of the story. And I was like, no, she's been destroying herself. This needs to be over, please. So I was kind of relieved. But then I entered like chapter 9 and 10 with this curiosity of, why are we still here? What else do we have? And this focus on Homais. So this is the most curious thing, this ending of the story. And I think there are clues, particularly in here, the part about Homais and the cripple, where it says, for the sake of his own reputation, he sought to get rid of him by any means. So he launched a secret campaign against him, which revealed both the depth of his cunning and the viciousness of his vanity. And that also gives me a clue why the very end of the story is this. Since
Mm.
Bovary's death, 3
Mm.
doctors have succeeded one another in Yonville without being able to establish themselves. So effectively does Monsieur Holmes, I don't know how to say that one, route
Mhm.
them. He has an enormous clientele. The authorities cultivate him and public opinion protects him. He has just received the Legion of Honor.
Mm.
So it draws this question for me. I looked back at the thing, so getting rid of Charles, destroying him, having there not be a doctor, so he is like the source for ailments. The smallness of that, the viciousness of that, and the possibility of him meeting Charles and Emma and manipulating things in little ways behind the scenes. And it had to be, I mean, their vulnerabilities, their, destructiveness, their only self-destructiveness had to be there. But the idea that in this story, he's been working to try to destroy them
So
in
you're-
these little
so
ways, taking
me-
advantage of.
Can I try to make sure I understand what you're saying?
Okay.
So first, one thing that I found very helpful in your description there and in revisiting those lines is that you definitely see Homais go from tedious and absurd to vicious and cunning. I mean, the effect of his variety of tediousness becomes very, very clear at the end. He is a monster. And then he gets the Legion of Honor. So I think I did not see him so much as monstrous prior to the end, but at the end, it seemed like, no, this is what that kind of pretentiousness and dishonesty and cunning and this is what it really amounts to, and what
This
it
is
really
what, yeah, and this is what it's capable of.
capable of.
And that he doesn't see himself as a monster. He's achieving this. And we see it a little bit with the shopkeeper who takes advantage of, she doesn't have enough money. And so he's going to lend her and kind of the trap that she gets into with that again, just, and how desperate it makes her.
Part of it is, revealing the depth of his viciousness in certainly an effect of what he does. And then also is what you're saying, that he plays a more central role in the novel than you realized until
that he was more important in the way that, I guess, okay, so Charles and Emma don't win. I mean, they're completely destroyed. And it's this is what wins in our world. This is what succeeds. And it is vicious and not harmless as we kind of were looking at him. But he is manipulating things for his own vanity, and it doesn't bother him that he destroyed that in little ways. I'm curious to go back in the novel and look at other ways where maybe it was hinted at that Holmes kind of was pushing them in this direction. I wonder, and if it even is hinted at was somehow he's I don't know, maybe it's too subtle.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not there as plainly as if that's his point that it should be. I don't know.
I don't quite see him as the force behind what happens with Emma. That part doesn't resonate with me, but just as the essence of the world in which she's trapped. But that's
partial like using what happens with Emma to become more powerful as well. Like I don't see him being powerful at all leading up to the end, and then in the end he becomes that vicious.
Yeah, he felt more like a juxtaposition with her than like a, I don't know, like a causal force behind what happened there.
I think, again, in order for him to have manipulated any of it, the vulnerability had to be with Charles and Emma, like that. And I don't know. It was part of how I was trying to answer the question, why are we still here?
Yeah.
What is the point about this? Why this focus now on Homais?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you. Who's next, Joseph?
Ray is next.
First, I just want to reiterate that I do love this ending. Like, it's great. I understand your disgust at it, but I do think it's great. Maybe one aspect of it is I included a little link to a painting by Gustave Courbet of the Burial at Ornans, which is was painted like 6 years or so beforehand. And I think it kind of displayed a similar sort of attitude towards life as Flaubert, of, okay, here we have this death in this provincial village, and it's just this big sort of amorphous crowd of people. You have like the sort of the gravedigger kneeling down looking up at the priest like, get on with it already, and the priest just sort of just droning on, and the other sort of figures in red, I don't know what they are exactly, but just the boredom in their face, and the kids just like looking up like, oh yeah, come on, is this going to keep on going? Like it's that same attitude of, and of course then that hole in the ground of like, that's the afterlife right there. It's just this bleak nothingness, and that's the same attitude in very that Flaubert is presenting is, well, here she is at her death throes, and basically the image of death that she has is of that singing blind man and of just that staring face. Like that's all there is. There's nothing. And I think you guys just don't understand nihilism. You guys, I think just the level of how futile and ugly and tedious life is. It's too foreign to quite get like the way he's really rubbing it in completely and finally and totally, and not as much as like he's doing it much more than he did in the early part of the novel, you say, because it's the climax, because this is it. And maybe it's overwhelming and disorienting, but I think
I want to interrupt you for 1 second because I think you just hit on something that's key. You said, I don't understand nihilism. Maybe it's that I do understand it. And so I was violently repulsed by it. And I think it became much more explicit how much of a nihilist he is in the end. And therefore, I'm not judging the novel as bad art on those grounds. I'm saying this crossed a threshold where this person creating this universe felt to me utterly inhumane when we got to the end. It didn't feel like he had any sensitivity or sympathy. And that's the thing that you and I were discussing long ago, is I described it as feeling gleeful, as him not seeming to have much sympathy for her. It's interesting because the scenes that you read, Shoshana, about her, like seeing again the grace in the priest or something, I didn't even take those as sincere. I thought he was sort of, like mocking the fact that she still has those moments. It didn't feel real to me. So I just want to clarify again that it's not that I'm judging this as bad art. It's not that I'm saying the ending is inconsistent with the rest. I'm saying it became so intensely, I don't know if nihilistic is the right word to use, but it just became so, okay, I could imagine a work, and I'd like to come up with a concrete to fill this in, but I could imagine a work where somebody is lamenting that spiritual values are impossible to achieve and has that kind of mocking, dwelling in the kind of reveling in the tedium of it, that sort of a presentation, but still at its core, especially when it comes down to someone's death, feels a sense of sorrow and humanity for that person in that moment. And that that would seem to me consistent with what had come before. I don't think it is now that I know what Flaubert was trying to do, but I could imagine her death being treated with a little bit more dignity and sympathy. And that's not how I felt in this book.
Yeah, I guess one aspect, see, I'm trying to think. I guess a big part of it, and I didn't mean to say you didn't understand nihilism in a broad sense or concretely, even just in a certain way of it. Sort of like when I say nihilistic, I don't mean sort of hatred for the good for being the good. I don't, not in that way of just there's just no values in the world. You know, it's a wasteland. That's the sense I meant that in.
No, and I just want to clarify that I take no offense to your saying that. I totally understand. You're saying like you with your benevolent perspective just can't. And I've confessed that many times that this book, it's hard for me to even wrap my head around it because it's so foreign spiritually to me. But the distinct, I just want to be clear that the distinction I want to make is that it's not a judgment of the book artistically. It's that I feel like I got really clear on what the theme is, and it became much more repulsive to me than it was earlier on. That was the change. Not that the ending is inconsistent with the rest, or I don't get it, just that it seems to reveal a soul to me that I find.
Well, I feel like what you're sort of wanting here is just at least some moment when like Emma is lying there and she gets at least something quasi, not like Kira exactly at the end, but at least some sort of dignity of like looking back and feeling like, oh, those wonderful dreams of Scott, you know, those one, you know, like just a few moments of recollection and beauty, and then she dies. At least some sort of bit of like, it was at least wonderful to have an illusion, not just, you know, I'm covered in brown splotches and oh god, like I actually have to say it was really beautiful just how sickening physically, like it really reminds me of what it's like to be ill. Just like how dirty and ugly and unpleasant it is to be sick. But anyway, so but that's something
I'm not sure if there's something I needed positively. I think it might have been that I needed less of what happened, what actually happened. That's my guess. I'm not sure. I'd have to
For
try
me,
to.
I like reached a point where I was like, I get it,
Enough.
and then it kept going, and I was like, I get it, and then it kept going, and it just was really laying it on very thick, and I was like, oh my gosh, like,
got it.
Spare me a little bit, like.
And that's why I felt like grinding it in. And that's, I think, where the gleeful comes from. Like, no, I'm not done. I want to have like, I want to prolong this even more. And that, I think, Wendy, is where
it's like
I get the idea
tickling you and you're like, stop, and they won't stop.
Yeah.
I guess I just find maybe it's just an issue of, I mean, sometimes more is more. You know, it's not too much. It's just, at least from my perspective, of just like, yeah, if you want to convey that this is what life is like, and even your death is horrible and tedious, that's how you do it, and you did a perfect job, and I wouldn't want to detail less. At least that's me.
Mm-hmm. I want several details less myself, but that's just me.
But again, it still feels like we're talking a little bit at cross purposes, because I could maybe accept that I don't want to detail less to convey what ultimately is Flaubert's view.
Mm-hmm.
But he disgusts me. That all those details are there, and that is his view, is incredibly difficult for me to endure. So it's I guess prior to section 6, since we had it in I'll just arbitrarily call it section 6, prior to that I could relate more to the perspective of the author, not relate. It's not my attitude toward life, but it wasn't completely appalling and alien to me. And after the ending, it was. It changed in nature. My experience of it changed in nature.
I had the same experience.
So interesting.
I'm just at home with it.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good to have a strong view to counter mine.
Yeah, I am appreciative of this.
Stefan.
I just love Ray and how you just coming from out of nowhere, and you're just like, I love the dark and dreary details, and it is a breath of fresh air, because normally we do exist in such a benevolent existence in our objectivist world, and it's good.
And I just want to say, for the record of everyone in this group, that the whole reason Ray is here is that we were having this sort of conversation by message prior to the group, and I was basically desperately begging him to participate. So I love this engagement. It's fantastic, even if we don't agree. And honestly, when it comes down to it, I think we end up usually basically agreeing.
Like, I think
we're basically on the same page. It's a difference of emphasis, and I don't know. I love evil. It's wonderful and fascinating. Like,
you've made a lot of confessions.
Like
he's made a lot of confessions that I could put into a highlight reel and use against him.
Please do. I really want to see on the YouTube channel, just like Ray Schramm is the enemy of objectivism, and just every
he loves evil. He thinks about how to get rid of girls before he we've got a lot to work with.
Idealism is just a dreamy state. Morality is just a way to make yourself feel better.
Right, I remember him saying that.
Wonderful. All right, Stefan, it's really your
turn.
Okay,
that's great. So I think the big problem we have in having this discussion, just kind of taking a step back, is we're not really clear about what category we're talking about. Are we talking about the emotional side of it, like how it made you feel, or like the philosophic side? And like you said, I don't like psychologizing either, and I try to not go there. But the feeling I got from this, just from a feeling perspective, was that of like being around a dead person and not wanting to be there. And imagine someone you love, and you have these kind of details before you. You don't want to revisit those things. And I think that's where it's uncomfortable, because I don't want to think of death in that way, because it sucks.
That reminds me of another example I just want to throw in here. Yeah, you don't want to think about that. So what do? As soon as it's over, you go and party, because that's what people do. There was a line about going to just revel and celebrate, because that's what we do to distance ourselves. Again, it was like one just crushing detail of nobody giving a shit about it.
Yeah.
One after another. That is really awful to endure.
It's like Antigone in a way, which, by the way, I want to hear your experience of Antigone, because you posted the pink lettering on the stage, and I thought what you thought too. I'm just curious if you can ever give us an insight to how that was. But when I was listening to Leonard's presentation of that, he said, you might think this is archaic, right? You want to go get the body of somebody, but no, really think about it. And when my grandfather, he passed last year, and my family decided to have him cremated. I didn't want that, but I also wasn't going to I didn't have enough money to do the whole thing. But I thought about how much his body was important to me, in a sense, and it's not archaic, and I think how we view death is very important, and how we treat it, because it's important for the living. And I think when we're lingering on the story where it's you're around a dead person, and then you're getting these grotesque details, it's great art, It's fantastic art. And that's what I mean. We're mixing categories here because, you know, you're getting accused from maybe an emotional level where you're really not talking about the art level. You know what I mean? So anyways,
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah. Well, we went right to the heart of everything, but I have some questions that I could bring up. One, well, I'll save this one for later. So, are there any earnest valuers in this book is the question. And I want to put out the contenders of Charles, who we've talked about before, but, you know, seems like an earnest valuer, but just at such a superficial level that it almost becomes mockable. Justin. So let me find all the scenes. So first it was the image of, oh gosh, sweet Justin. At 9 in the morning, she awakened by a noise of voices in the square. There was a crowd gathered in the marketplace to read a large notice attached to one of the posts, the notice that all of her furniture was going to be repossessed. And she saw Justin climbing onto a stone and ripping it down. Just then, the village policeman grabbed him by the collar. Monsieur Homais left the pharmacy and Madame Lefrancois seemed to be making a speech in the midst of the crowd. So we first see him pulling down the poster that is so shameful to her. Then we, let's see. Oh, there's this detail. Dazed and mumbling, barely able to stand, Charles wandered around the room. He stumbled against the furniture and tore at his hair. The pharmacist had never thought he would see such a pathetic sight. He went back home to write to Monsieur Canavet and Dr. La Riviere. He couldn't concentrate and made more than 15 drafts. Hippolyte left for Neufchâtel, and Justin spurred Bovary's horse so hard he was forced to leave it, foundered and all but dead on the Bois Guillaume hill. And then the last time we see him is in the and there's the perfect juxtaposition with Rodolphe, who had been trapping in the woods all day to distract himself, slept peacefully in his chateau. Léon was sleeping too, in Rouen. There was someone else who was not asleep at this hour. Between the firs, a kneeling boy was crying on her grave. His chest was shaking with sobs beneath the burden of a great sorrow that was more tender than the moon and more unfathomable than the night. Suddenly the gate, so then we get shoved back into reality because the gate creaked. Lesty Boudoir recognized Justin climbing wall and knew who the culprit was who had been stealing his potatoes. So that's the assumption. Anyway, that seemed, all of those presentations of Justin seemed earnest and not undermined. And I just found that interesting. And I wonder if anyone has thoughts about that, because now we only see these little glimpses of that devotion, and we don't see him, you know, trying to live a whole life the way we do Emma, but there's nothing said to compromise or undermine the genuineness of that enthusiasm. I don't know, anybody have any thoughts about
the thing that I think first, which, like, I don't know, is that he's just young. Like, he kind of has that same thing that she did when, well, she does. She started when she was young in the convent, like, you know, having these aspirations.
It is interesting that he doesn't do anything explicitly to indicate that, though. I don't think. Maybe he didn't, I missed it, but I just found it interesting that there's just these little glimpses of Justin planted in there and nothing said to make him the fool.
To undermine him, absolutely. And I do find that interesting as well. I might be forcing it into the general perspective.
That does make sense.
That would fit,
Absolutely.
but the fact that there's no undermining does also make me question.
Interesting. Yeah. Molly, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of echo what Grace said, that he's young, and so that is in Flaubert's world, the only kind of person that can have any values or sincerity or
He's not yet been disillusioned, but he
have an ulterior
does
motive.
wait.
That there's no other reason for him to love her or value her.
Mhm. And then related to that, what's the deal with this Dr. La Riviere, who like
Right. I wanted to talk about
with a
that.
flourish has all the appearances of a romantic hero
Hmm.
Well,
and declares her dead, and it's pointless now.
at the lunch, going to lunch while she's dying.
Yeah, he did go to lunch. I know, that's what I got the text from Molly about. She was like,
All the doctors, instead of helping her, which they can't do, they just go to lunch. They don't even pretend to be helping her.
now he did say that there's no point in helping her, and he probably is. He can't help her at that point. She's dead.
But they go off and network professionally instead of trying to help her. It's so callous and cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and
Pretend
like,
they-
am I? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, normally, like if you were in a town of ignorant peasants, you would pretend to be a doctor and say, oh, well, we'll give her some purgatives or whatever, or a poultice. And you would show the people, doctors can do something to like to make her feel a little better in her final moments. But they're not even faking it. They're not even pretending to doctor to her. They just coldly go off and have lunch together. That to me was the most horrifying part. That was worse than the black file coming out. Was their difference. Yeah,
They're chatting, they're networking.
But yeah, I think because Justin was innocent, the only children, Emma in the convent and Justin as a child were the only innocent characters.
Mhm.
Yeah, and like he doesn't know her at all. Like he just is like, you're pretty.
Mhm. Ray, are you
Yeah.
still? Okay, yeah.
So in terms of any genuine valuers, there's a distinction between desiring something and valuing something.
Yeah.
Valuing is when you act to gain or keep.
Mhm.
And people, I mean, the only basically valuers you could say are Rudolph, because okay, I
Yes.
want this woman. Let me go through this series of steps like a professional. There's Leroux. I think that's right. The debt collector. Like he wants money, and oh boy, he's a professional about it. There's Homais, who wants prestige, and well, he does things for that. To act to gain or keep it. Actually, to keep it when that homeless guy starts causing a stink. But in terms of there is no such thing as a spiritual value. As in Justin, like, yeah, he has a adolescent infatuation, a deep one, but that's what he has. Like Emma, she's basically passive in the Rudolph affair, and is the same thing with Leon. It's more or less passive, you could say. There's no set with Charles. He just sort of happens to fall in love with the woman, and is her father, Emma's father, basically hands-hold him through the process. So there's no such thing as pursuing a spiritual value.
I think describing his as an adolescent infatuation is, I think you're just so groping for anybody to show any gesture of earnest affection that those scenes stand out. But I think adolescent infatuation is the right way to describe it. It's not something more.
Yeah, I want to say that's very deep, because I had very, very deep and protracted and painful adolescent infatuations. So I'm not saying that lightly, but
no, but it's not deep in the sense of a sustained and integrated and long range like actual attachment to something. It's strong, it's emotionally powerful, but it's not the same as.
And one thing is, it's not just that he can't do any, it's not he doesn't do anything about it, it's like he can't. Like, that'd be absurd for him to make advances on her. She would laugh at best.
Right.
But the only character you could say is the surgeon. I can't remember his name, but the surgeon, he, at least off screen, he pursues a brilliant and amazing career and becomes a famous surgeon.
But that's
like
why.
he's
Why is he in this story at all?
Yeah, I
so
don't
odd.
know. I don't. The only thing I can think of is I don't know why he put it in there, because he's just such an amazing character. Like, he's just so just handsome.
I want a book about that guy.
Yeah. Like,
Doesn't he serve to really juxtapose everyone else? Like, I loved his introduction because, when they were doing the clubfoot surgery, he was the one sane voice in it. Like, what have you guys done? And he was able to see it very clearly. So it helped her like emphasize how ridiculous the rest of them were being.
And he also has like a certain spiritual side, at least a little bit of, and it says like when he immediately recognizes, yeah, she's gone. And when he's looking at Charles, it says, even this man so inured to suffering could not help but like have a tear fall down his face. It's like, he actually has feelings.
Yeah.
Someone with feelings who's not a fucking incompetent. I'm sorry.
No.
Well,
someone who has an emotion, who's not incompetent or a child or Charles, just someone who, it's like, oh man, like this guy's amazing.
But that's odd to throw him.
I don't understand why he's there exactly. Like, it's like, oh, like Flaubert, like, hey, I didn't know you could fit this guy into your worldview. Please explain. Like,
exactly.
Give me more of that and less of the black bile.
No. The thing, I don't know actually how it fits. I don't know how it fits.
He doesn't fit. That's what's so odd to me. It's bizarre. Now, after I just said I don't like looking for biographical causes, I was so obsessed with this character when I read this paragraph the first time that I just Googled that name, and I read something that said this was based on Flaubert's father, who was, now I don't know if that's true or not, and it still doesn't justify throwing him into the novel with a presentation of a character who's completely, it's as if he came in from an alternate universe. That's what it feels like. Yeah, it feels like he entered from an alternate universe and then left with the mic drop. Oh, it's not his blood that's thick. And smiling, his undetected joke at home made the doctor open the door.
And he's gone.
And I do want to just say, he was criticized for having lunch, and it's like, well, I mean, Homais kind of forced him into it, and there's nothing he can do anyway. And he's not faking it, he's not like, oh, I'm going to give her like a purgative or something when that does nothing. It's like,
no, it seemed consistent with the way he's described. I'm just because I love it so much, it gives me an excuse to read it anyway. It says, his glance, more piercing than a scalpel, penetrated straight into your soul, cutting through every excuse and prudery to the underlying lie. And so he went his way, filled with that quiet majesty that comes of the consciousness of great talent, of a fortune, and of 40 years of hard work and irreproachable private life. So he was attractive. Says, you're all engaged in a pretense. She's going to die. Accept it. And what? I mean, but not callously. It's sympathetically. Yeah. It's just cutting through the nonsense straight to the truth.
I mean, it just, the only thing I can feel like is it's almost just the closest thing to a justification for him in the novel is just at least his statement of, okay, in Emma's world, there is nothing but worthless, shallow people, or maybe people who are well-meaning and positive like Charles, but dumb. But there are somewhere far away from her and her social circle, her milieu, there is such a thing as competence out there. It just,
So-
it's on the moon relative to her.
Basically, what you're saying is there are alternate universes. That's what, like there is a world but it's just inaccessible to her.
Yeah, I almost just want to say that. I mean, it doesn't, like, I've read other novels where it's like, okay, I'm surprised at like the variety of like different parts of society or feelings towards life they have, but this is I really wish he could have explained himself on this point.
Yeah.
Just I love him though.
Yeah.
We all love him.
Well, you know how Shakespeare throws in comic relief into this was our spiritual moment of spiritual relief. That's all we get. Okay, Wendy.
Okay, I think I might have an idea. I want to talk about Homais a little bit more. I want to go back, but before that, there's something that it says about that doctor, and it's that so in every town for miles around, there were replicas of his long merino overcoat and his full black frock coat, whose unbuttoned cuffs. So it gets into that people. Here's this admirable character, and what the world can make of him, what they can understand is just copying completely inessential characteristics about him. No, he's got, so that's how I think he fits into this novel. And this is what there are actually remarkable, heroic, rational people, efficacious, and this is what and people even see something admirable about him, but they completely misunderstand what's essential.
I think that sounds plausible, but the only thing is this is our very first indication in the whole book that such a person is possible.
Right.
So it's a little odd to throw him in the midst of the death scene and give us an indication at that point. Oh no, you actually, the dreams are not completely in vain. There is this great guy. It's just, it seemed inconsistent.
Okay, and then what I wanted to talk about, Homais, it relates to what you were saying with Justin. So the whole scene where Emma goes to Justin in order to get the poison, that paragraph, it says, the key turned in the lock and she went straight to the third shelf. So well did her memory guide her. Seized the blue jar, pulled open the stopper, plunged in her hand, and she poisons herself. So when I read that, I was like, I don't remember in the story exactly when she's been told about this poison, but vaguely I remember, and I didn't have time to go back, but I feel like that was maybe planted earlier.
Yeah, wasn't it when
she knew the poison was there?
Wasn't it when Homais was yelling at him for almost mixing up powders? Yeah.
And she was present then, so she knew about, but again, like specifically exactly where to get the poison. And then also remember, Homais is also the one who pushes the surgery on the cripple, and then he's embarrassed by that as well. So, I mean, it's not that Homais is somehow this criminal mastermind, but just the small viciousness and wanting to be destructive.
Are you saying you think he was trying to get her to poison herself? Because I don't think that scene, he was berating Justin at length, and she was just standing there waiting for him to talk to her. So that's why she remembered.
But he's even worried about people knowing that she got the poison from it. I mean, like he does a whole other, and the same thing, he's embarrassed by the failure of the surgery, because he promoted it. So it's I think
he's definitely on a like desperate quest for glory and reputation. So he needs to safeguard his reputation against accusations that he made it possible for someone to poison themselves. But I don't see anything that suggests.
Right. Again, not a mastermind, but sort of his desire for that and the destructiveness of that to Emma and Charles and how vulnerable they were. And again, just like the beggar, it's this result of this. He gets him committed to an asylum. Oh, he's victorious. And it's just
No,
like,
I
what have you
think
done?
the common element is that he's completely incompetent and totally full of himself. So his incompetence creates opportunities for things to go terribly wrong. But in the case of the beggar, and in the case of the clubfoot, he was actively seeking, for the sake of his own glory, that something to treat them. But in the case of Emma, I don't think he had any active. He just had incompetence and not proper storage of his equipment. Who do we have next, Joseph? I guess
Shoshana.
Yeah, I had not noticed this before, although, well, sometimes you think you haven't noticed something, but when you were talking about La Riviere and you were talking about Antigone, and I realized that there's this little line here about when he shows up, there's sort of a button pushed and it's very dramatic. The cavalry has arrived and there are actually these 3 horses. And then it says, the sudden appearance of a god wouldn't have caused greater excitement. And we know about that. That's actually from Greek tragedy, right? The Deus Ex Machina. And so, right. So for this moment, it's as if it suggests, oh, maybe we're actually in a Greek tragedy in which there's going to be a god arriving and that's going to change things. No, we're not in a Greek tragedy. We're in a realistic kind of grubby story in which even if the god arrives, it's not going to help because that's what the god is going to tell you. She's going to die. And so
my gosh.
So I think it actually does cause your attention. It's supposed to do that, but it's also true that when he comes in, he's got the wisdom and the clear sight to tell you, no, I'm here. And then there's, you're right. His presence is very dramatic, but you notice he has trouble leaving because everybody wants, kind of to reach out and touch the hem of his garment as if his knowledge is going to save them all from heartburn or feeling ravenous or prickling sensations. And you can just picture it because they know a man who knows his job and nobody else knows the job. And so there he is. And so they all want to ask him about things. And then
when he won't drop everything to attend to all their minor ailments, then he's a jerk. They didn't really like him anyway. That's what they say after he leaves.
Yeah. Kind of as if they own him. And
I think that's really helpful. And the God comes in and the God's proclamation is there's nothing that can be done, but it's still the existence of that God. Those gods have been denied. Their existence has been denied from the start of the novel. So it's still just kind of shocking to see that someone like that exists.
Yeah.
Mary Elaine?
Shoshana, what you were just saying made me think of Dr. Dolcamari, I think it is, in The Elixir of Love by Donizetti. And there's and he sings about all the things he can cure with his elixir, and it's hysterically funny. But I wanted to ask you said earlier, that Emma had other options, because she's trapped in this small town world and she makes a lot of bad choices. I
think that Charles doesn't have a lot of intelligence, but he would not tell her that she should die. She could tell him, and he still cares about her. So that's a start.
That was one of the lines that I found most painful. Is like, she couldn't tell him because she couldn't endure his compassion for her. It wasn't compassion. There was some line about that would be intolerable to deal with him caring about. Yeah.
Well, see, that's the thing, that would be a temporary situation.
Yeah.
I don't know, count to 200 and you've told him, and now there's a path forward. So, I mean, that's a start, but I think she doesn't even think about that. She just thinks, well, I've got to get out of here. And oh, death, that would be romantic. That would end it. But it isn't. She's willing to
melodramatic and self-absorbed and totally out of touch with reality.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this came up in the context of the hazard of presenting novels to young people that feature suicide, and that, you know, there are options in reality outside of this. Within Flaubert's world, there's not much of an option. There's the option of continuing to live in misery with Charles, or to continue to grope at satisfaction with philanderers who are just going to dump her, or there's death. I think those are pretty much the options.
Well, she could read some other books.
What books? There are no other books.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't she read Scott? I mean, you know, people solve problems in Scott.
I don't think Flaubert
People
thinks
world,
that.
Shoshana. No, I have to say here that if I was giving Emma advice, I'd tell her to kill herself. In the context of Flaubert's universe, you know, good for you. Just, you know, do it in a less romantic way. Just you know, effective. So I just think that there isn't options in Flaubert's world. Like in real life, we could tell her things, hopefully. But in Flaubert's world, like that really is the best option. And I just also want to say about just one thing that happened with the doctor earlier when everyone's mentioning what was it? All the people coming up and wanting to ask about their ailments and then resentful when he doesn't ask. It just made me think of. I feel like the best way of describing Madame Bovary is the perfect novel that'll make you want to kill everybody. You know, it's just what a frustratingly tedious universe. Yeah. I want that novel about him because I wonder what it'd like to be a great man suffocated by these kinds of people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could. So more on Homais, the perverse line about, it said, he would have taken his 2 sons with him in order to accustom them to painful situations and to give them an object lesson, a solemn spectacle that they would remember later on. So he wanted to take them to her deathbed as like a performance for them to learn from. Let's see. Yeah, just describing him as temperamentally unable to stay away from famous people. Yeah, that's why he has to question La Riviere. He's temperamentally unable to stay away from famous people. The last thing I'll just mention, since we're out of time and don't have time to discuss it, is I found very powerful, very beautifully written, and very compelling her descent into madness. I mean, there were successive stages of her almost merging, you know, reality becoming indistinguishable around her. And there were some just incredibly powerful passages of what was her internal state of madness projected on the world around her. I found those really compelling.
Agreed.
All right. Well, this was a lively discussion. We have decided upon our next work. I need to figure out a schedule for it. I have not done that yet, and I need to send everyone a link to the version that we'll be using so that we can be on the same page. We've decided, well, okay, little thing in advance. Grace said she can't bear, after Tess and Madame Bovary, she couldn't bear another book as miserable as these, but I haven't actually read the book that we've chosen, but I know a little bit about the author, so I know we're at least in for some comic relief. We've decided we're going to read Dead Souls by Gogol. So that's what's next up in the lineup. We're going to use the Constance Garnett translation because it's sure to be in the public domain, so you can order a copy or we'll be able to find it online. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to having that one become part of my repertoire since it isn't presently. I know for a fact, I remember years ago, Leonard Peikoff telling me about it because he had just read it and loved it. So there's lots to recommend it. And I'm a fan of some of his other plays and short works.
I'm so excited to read it. I haven't read the whole thing. I've only read part of it. And I already am really excited to discuss it with the book group.
Great. All right, so I'll send out some details on that. Thank you again, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.